Good afternoon. I'm Lisa Rinaman, your St. John's Riverkeeper, and I really appreciate you spending your lunch hour with us to talk about biosolids. Biosolids is the pretty word for sewage sludge, and I will apologize in advance that we will be talking a lot about sewage and sewage sludge on your lunch hour. But it is a very important issue that we need to discuss, and it's really critical to our mission to defend the St. John's River and advocate for its protection. And it's one of the most egregious new pollution problems in the St. John's River, in the fact that it's actually permitted. So look forward to visiting with you all about why it's so important for us to take action, what the environmental, the health risk, as well as the economic risk are, and then most importantly, what we can do together to make sure we're stopping this harmful practice and protect the St. John's, but also to protect all of Florida waters. Just a little bit more background on the St. John's Riverkeeper. We're in our 26th year, and we focus on investigation, on advocating for policy changes, looking for solutions, educating the public, raising awareness, and most importantly, engage in involving citizens. We cannot do this work without you. So again, thank you for spending some time with us today to figure out how we can work together to protect the St. John's River. Just a little background of the St. John's. It is one of the largest watersheds in the state of Florida. It's the second largest ecosystem in the state of Florida, next to the Everglades. Our watershed is more than 8,800 square miles, and the river flows north. The river begins way down in Indian River County, Brevard County, and Osceola County there at the bottom of the slide. And it begins its 310-mile journey from its headwaters all the way up to Duval County and Jacksonville, where it meets the Atlantic Ocean at Mayport. The river is a lazy river. It only drops in elevation about 27 feet its entire 310-mile journey. And so when things go into our river that shouldn't be there, it sticks around for a long time. It has a long-term impact, and it also so everything that happens in the headwaters impacts our downstream waters. So if you live anywhere north of Indian River County, Brevard County, Osceola County, this issue we're talking about today is very important to you. And that's why we make sure we work to protect the entire watershed, which we'll be talking a little bit about today. When we were founded in 1999, it was over the fact that we were seeing significant chronic blue-green toxic algal blooms. This is a cyanobacteria that it will outbreak in the river when there's excess nutrient, excess nitrogen and phosphorus. Nitrogen and phosphorus, they occur naturally in our waterways, but when they're in excess, these outbreaks can be triggered, and they can be highly toxic and dangerous for wildlife as well as for human use. So fishermen and riverfront property owners and people came together to create our organization to reduce nutrient pollution. This is a slide that really demonstrates the danger of these outbreaks, and these algal blooms are called harmful algal blooms. This photograph, if you can tell, there's actually several kids that are on this inner tube in Doctor's Lake. We went out and tested this algal bloom after we saw this photo, and the toxins present in this outbreak were 300 times more toxic than safe recreational standards. So we've been working for years to reduce nutrient pollution in the river. We've been able to get some regulatory protections in place that have done so, as well as increase awareness and signage to make sure families and people know how dangerous these harmful algal blooms can be, so we can see less green in the river, but also to make sure we don't see people putting themselves in harm's way like this family was doing unknowingly. But there are all other sorts of impacts to humans. When we have these outbreaks, this is a bluish green algae that was out. You can't use your boat. So we lose access to our waterways. The waterways aren't fishable. They're not swimmable. You shouldn't breathe. You shouldn't be near this. And so there's a reduction in property value. So it's real important to the tourism industry as well as to the realty industry to make sure we reduce nutrients out of the St. John's. As well as it can block out sunlight. And when there's less sunlight getting down to our submerged aquatic grasses, that's killing off habitat. And our river, our estuary, is the foundation of Northeast Florida's thriving seafood industry, as well as its important habitat that's getting harmed for our recreational fisheries as well. Excess nutrients come from all different places. They come from our yards. If you're using too much urban fertilizer, sanitary sewer overflows, septic tanks, wastewater treatment facilities, animal waste, if you're not picking up off your pet. These are all things that we've been working on to reduce, to make sure we're having less problems. And really nothing but rain should go down our drain. So making sure you don't have grass clippings and things from your yard, all of those things add to this problem. And so while we've made some ground in reducing all of those sources through fertilizer ordinances and regulations to ensure we're seeing less coming from our wastewater treatment facilities, a new problem surfaced in 2018, and that's the land disposal of biosolids or sewage sludge. The industry spent a lot of money to come up with the name biosolids because obviously it sounds better than sewage sludge. But sewage sludge is highly concentrated human waste that quite often is commingled with industrial waste in wastewater treatment facilities. And this thick muck has to go be disposed of somewhere. We'll get into more of the different disposal methods. But unfortunately, due to a 2007 law passed by the Florida Legislature, the headwaters of the St. John started receiving on average about 70,000 tons of this sewage sludge from South Florida. This is permitted sewage sludge coming into the headwaters of the St. Johns River. It's being disposed of on farmland, but we're seeing a significant runoff of nutrient pollution from these sites. The reason this transfer happened in 2007 to 2013 was in 2007, the Florida Legislature passed the Northern Everglades and Estuaries Protection Program. And they basically banned the land disposal of Class B biosolids. So this is the type of sewage sludge that's less treated. And they banned this practice in South Florida to protect the Everglades. So as you can see there on this chart, the bottom line are the years. And then the vertical side is the annual nutrients applied in tons. Right about 2007 to 2013 was a significant shift of total nitrogen, which is in orange, as well as total phosphorus, which is in blue. And all of that is new permitted pollution coming in from South Florida because the cheapest place for South Florida utilities to send this material was to the headwaters of the St. Johns. It's spread on farmland to be used like fertilizer, but unfortunately, there's much more nutrients than these lands need. And so we're seeing significant runoff into the St. Johns River, which is undermining the river's health from its very source. This is a water quality trend for total phosphorus that just came out for 2025 from the St. Johns Water Management District. And all of these little arrows that are pointing up means there's a significant increase in phosphorus in the headwaters. This is Indian River County, Osceola County. And if it has a little yellow dot in it, it means there was a 5% increase just over last year of total phosphorus in the water quality samples in the upper basin of the river or the headwaters. And in some cases, it's an 18% increase from last year. So it just demonstrates that this practice it's permitted pollution and it's a significant pollution source that's undermining the health of the St. Johns River because it all flows north. It's all flowing into the middle and the lower basins. In addition to this being a significant pollution issue, as well as a significant health issue, it's also an economic issue. We'll be talking a little bit later about an economic study we looked at in the St. Johns River, and based on all the different factors that looking at this, South Florida's transfer of their sewage sludge to the headwaters of the St. Johns is a $1.12 billion cleanup liability that us as taxpayers have to absorb. And so we wanted to share this with you all today, and most importantly, work with you and others to make sure we're getting a sustainable long-term policy to manage sewage sludge in our state. As we just demonstrated, we don't have a sustainable plan right now. And unfortunately, since we're growing at about 1,000 people per day, there's a lot to be done to make sure we're doing things to move forward in a way that protects our rivers for future generations. That's one of the reasons we're excited to introduce Craig Diamond, who will be up next. Craig is with Thousand Friends of Florida. He was actually brought on board to manage a very comprehensive study of biosolids policy in the state of Florida. So I'll turn it over to Craig at this point to talk about their study and some of their findings in their studies and how we're going to use those moving forward. Craig?
Okay, thank you, Lisa. You've covered everything, but I appreciate the introduction. Just by quick recap, Lisa referred to the report conducted by the 1,000 Friends of Florida, which was published this last June or July, and there is a website and a story map there for folks to go ahead and follow along the bouncing biosolids and learn everything that we had discovered over the past couple of years. Slide, please, if we can advance. Okay, as Lisa captured with the tractor, what we're dealing with at the end of the process, where the green arrow is under transportation, the biosolids are transferred from the wastewater treatment facilities over to forests, farms, and composters. Slide, please. The primary means of disposal, or we politely refer to that as management of these wastewater residuals, is, as indicated before, land application and composting with subsequent land application. There are other procedures such as landfilling, which was a traditional method, but it continues to shrink just because landfill space is expensive, in a variety of thermal conversions, and I'll talk about a couple of those later. Those tend to be more costly, and there's still some problematic residuals within the ash products to be dealt with. Slide, please. We looked at data from 2018 through 2021. Things have changed since then. So at that time, we were looking at about 340,000 dry tons of biosolids a year. That's the primary measurement. And you can see the green is this class AA. Lisa referred to class B and class AA as different levels of treatment. The majority of it was marketed as class AA, effectively composted biosolids or treated to a higher level. And this number continues to go up because of constraints on locations with which to continue dumping class B. Let's go to the next slide, if we can. If not, I've pulled up the thing on my own machine. There we go, thanks. So as I said, our study looked through 2021. There was a report, or at least information shared by DEP at a Senate hearing back in December, where they're reporting quite a bit more tonnage now, but there's been an increase clearly in the class AA, which is the middle part of that table, and a decrease in class B as permitted sites are not coming in for renewal. The increase in landfill, I'm not really sure about where they get that data from, because the numbers just are higher than the real biosolids that are currently being produced. Slide, please. So as Lisa indicated, the impetus for the project was really a recognition that there is a large amount of biosolids being produced in South Florida, again, primarily Dade and Brevard counties, that were being shifted over to those red hot spots in the right-hand slide, predominantly Polk and Osceola counties. Slide, please. So the 1,000 Friends of Florida was interested in two primary issues at the time: whether or not there was really an environmental justice issue, and that there was a need to recognize the externalities or those economic impacts that Lisa spoke about, concerned about them not being adequately addressed by our disposal methods. And then secondarily, did the state, at the state level, was this mix of treatment methodologies and disposal management tools really optimal in the long run? Which ones are more cost effective versus not? And should the state possibly consider looking at a different mix of things and making the utilities behave differently? Slide. So our scope was to go ahead and look at regulatory framework, conduct a big literature review, update data, which at that point the DEP had really left off in terms of published data in about 2014. So there was a need for, at the time we started the study, to consolidate and update information. We did develop a project geodatabase that was going to allow us to do a variety of analytics, and we were to begin to look into contaminants of emerging concerns such as PFAS, and I know Lisa will talk about that later. Slide. So as I mentioned, we were to do statistical assessments of environmental justice, and critical to the points raised previously, what is the connection between biosolids application, nutrient runoff, and the like from these locations, and surface water conditions and groundwater conditions, and then ultimately to prepare recommendations for stakeholders. Slide. So just looking at a couple of the hotspots, as I said, Dayton, Broward are the primary producers. Note that Volusia and Broward in the right-hand column are also not insignificant producers of biosolids. Next slide, hopefully. This is referring again to Class B. Again, the world is changing in terms of Class AA application, but our focus was on Class B at the time because while it is permitted, it presented seemingly the larger scale of problems. Note the 4 counties highlighted in red, Osceola, Indian River, Polk, and Brevard. These were the counties with the largest square miles of permitted application. At that point, there were 150 plus square miles. That number's come down since 2021. Slide, please. Now, this is Class B volume. This is the quantity in terms of dry tons, and you'll see 3 of the top counties. The top 3 counties are, in fact, in the Upper St. Johns River Basin, Osceola, Polk, and Brevard. Slide. As part of our assessment for the impacts on water quality, we looked at these watersheds. USGS divides them up into different scales of watersheds. The Huck 12 is the smallest, meaning you can really dig down deeply into what's going on. We were looking at 153 watersheds where Class B biosolids were being applied. So the maximum amount in any particular watershed, it turned out at the time we were looking at, was over 8,800 dry tons with an average of 500. But 12% of these that were applying more than 1,000 dry tons, which is well above the mean. Again, the 2 hot counties are Osceola and Polk, typically over a square mile of farmland. Slide, please. We also looked at impaired watersheds. So this is a DEP designation of whether or not the watershed is meeting it's generally going to be Class 3 standards for recreation, swimming, and the like. And we specifically looked at impairments as designated for total nitrogen and total phosphorus, TN and TP. In this case, those there were 58% of the watersheds that we evaluated were impaired for TN or TP. So more than half of those that were receiving biosolids were specifically impaired. If we go down to those that were just in Polk and Osceola County, you can see that the great majority of them are in fact impaired, 35 out of 41. Slide, please. So in terms of what we came up with as a quick summary, if you're applying Class B biosolids, there's a high likelihood that you'll be creating impaired water bodies or be associated with impaired water bodies at a pretty high confidence level for typical environmental data. If you're applying over 1,000 tons, the likelihood was high that you would be adjacent to an impaired water body, not necessarily a ways upstream from it. And then when you're looking at those peak watersheds where we were looking at applications greater than 5,000 tons per year, the likelihood of being impaired became highly significant. Slide, please. We did also look at groundwater. Groundwater data is far more limited. When we tried to work with what we could, a lot of the watersheds don't have wells in them, and there's a split between the wells, between confined and unconfined, so they're just far, far fewer data points with which to make any strong statistical analysis. Next slide, please. That aside, specifically for confined aquifers, these are the ones that are typically a little deeper, you'll see that for total phosphorus, the aquifer underneath watersheds where they're applied is roughly 2.5 times higher for phosphorus and about 6 times higher, 5 or 6 times higher for nitrogen. Slide, please. I jumped over this at the beginning in terms of our scope of work. We were, as part of our assessment of whether the state's doing an optimal arrangement for management, we looked at benefit cost approach to the capital improvements and operations required to manage the primary means of disposal. So we looked at land requirements, operation cost, landfilling, loss of landfill capacity. We also looked at non-market cost, greenhouse gases because of the transportation expenses or transportation impacts from South Florida to the St. Johns, as well as other exchanges between counties. And we tried to evaluate the shadow price of pollution as well. Next slide. So that was on the cost side. We also looked at benefits. Some of the methodologies can produce electricity, for instance. The biosolids are used to either supplement fertilizer or displace fertilizer for certain agricultural operations. So those are avoided costs for fertilizer purchase and avoided landfill costs, for instance. So we tried to put all that together. Next slide. So this, you'll see these are the direct costs. The thing I want to point out here is the net benefits. The benefits minus the cost are negative for all approaches, all primary approaches to managing our biosolids. This is because this is a waste product and it is an expense to get rid of. It is not socially beneficial to do so in the context of just simple operations. You'll see the Cedron Varcor one. That's a particular technology that is proposed or it's under construction down in Indiantown. We'll come back to that later. Next slide, please. When we're looking at the non-market cost and benefits, you can see that moving to a higher quality of composting, as well as this distillation, compression, and distillation technology, those are positive. Those are not surrounded by parentheses. So when we look at the land application, Class B, based on the cost and benefits for non-market, it has the greatest negative impacts, $11 million per thousand dry tons. And that gets back to that $1 billion of impacts that Lisa referred to earlier. Slide, please. When we look at the 6 methodologies that we identified and look at them relative to land application as that sort of base worst case in terms of the economics, we can see that the high quality composting and the distillation and recompression technologies are multiple times beneficial in contrast to land application. Again, they have their costs, but in terms of distribution among management, this would suggest moving towards those technologies would be socially beneficial in the long run when we consider all costs and benefits. Slide, please. So we did come to a number of conclusions. One thing that Lisa alluded to, this problem is not going to get smaller. When you include all the tourism, which continues to grow here as well, we're up to almost 25 million people and continuing to grow. So, and we all produce biosolids, everyone flushes. It all has to go somewhere and be dealt with. The chemical characteristics of biosolids are not tracked perfectly. There are data as to what their nutrient content was, where they come from. Utilities are generally compliant in terms of reporting to the EPA and the DEP, but it's not perfect. More data would be useful. A critical thing that I know John will be talking about in a few minutes is the Class AA, the higher treated biosolids, are not tracked using any type of inventory or manifest. So their impacts in terms of nutrients, nutrient loading in the watersheds where they're placed and on the farms where they're placed are only then estimated by Ag and Consumer Services and the DEP. Slide, please. The environmental impacts are significant because biosolids are not required to be 100% free of heavy metals, nutrients, chemicals, emergent concern whatsoever. The highest quality composted biosolids are free of pathogens, so they're safe for you to go ahead and stick your hand in and put in your garden, but all the other components are there in varying degrees. We did determine that there was a statistically significant relationship between land application of those Class B biosolids and the likelihood of impaired water bodies. There's statistical support. Again, the data was highly limited for assessing that at least phosphorus concentrations are greater in confined aquifers underneath land application sites than in sites elsewhere. And, again, more of this data is needed. We are, the Water Management District, St. John's District, has conducted a couple of studies on the impacts on surface waters, and those impacts are beginning to be reasonably well understood. Groundwater analysis remains lacking. Slide. To highlight the point again, if it isn't clear to everyone, Osceola County is getting the biggest share of the state's biosolids. It has a lot of land, which is mostly unimproved pasture. For years and years, the agricultural operators have been, I won't say happy, but they're certainly willing to receive and spread the biosolids because they don't actually have to pay for them. And as Lisa noted, the county's location is right at the edge of the area that was set aside for protection for Lake Okeechobee and the Everglades, and that was the closest county to the biosolids production of South Florida. Next. When we looked at the economics, just make clear that the externalities, the imposed societal costs that can be reasonably attributed to class biosolids are not included anywhere. So there are no out-of-pocket costs for those that receive them, and any other social costs are really paid for indirectly, whether it's cleanup costs, lost recreation, lost property value, the things that Elisa alluded to earlier. Those are paid by us collectively. Next slide. Of those particular technologies that we evaluated, the vapor recompression and distillation appears to be cost effective. We'll see how that works once the Indiantown operation is up and running. And the higher levels of composting that John will speak to in a little later, that do a pretty good job in terms of sequestering nutrients and PFAS and the like, may impose smaller public costs down the road. Other waste energy options are there, but the capital costs for these are pretty considerable. In fact, I was looking at one particular methodology specifically to deal with PFAS, and a small facility runs about $17 million just to go get that up and running. And anything involving higher temperatures involves a lot of trade-offs depending upon the mix of that go into them. And while you may be eliminating PFAS, you may be creating dioxins or furans, so there's a potential trade-off there. Next slide. We made a number of recommendations through Thousand Friends and collaborated with St. John's Riverkeeper on where we should go from here. One key one was to get a single state agency to be responsible for all biosolids information and collect appropriate data that will help everyone be more informed about managing and what the options are. Second key one was to do much higher levels of monitoring in ground and surface water so that we can really assess where these impacts are. Slide. A critical thing, given that we're shifting tremendously into Class AA production, is that we need to really incorporate that data into BMAP planning. And the last item, which was a key thing for the Thousand Friends board, is there's going to be prospective liability for either utilities or the property owners where these materials are being dumped as relates to PFAS. Some other states are already dealing with this. Florida's a bit behind the curve. And we do need a comprehensive program to come up with funding all this. And our recommendation was to establish a generator fee and some mechanisms to go ahead and move those funds over and make them available for dealing with the impacts that biosolids impose. I think that's it. Yep. Okay. Back to you. Thank you.
All right, Craig, thank you so much. And stick around, we'll have some questions at the end. I just want to thank Craig for all of his work, as well as Thousand Friends for their efforts on helping get this conversation and better policy making based on good facts and data. Another wonderful partner in this is a Public Trust for Conservation. John November is their lead attorney and executive director. And we worked on bringing the science forward as well as the law, looking at are there opportunities to do some legal challenges as well as better policy and advocacy in Tallahassee, and also looking at the economics of this practice specifically in the St. Johns River. So I'd like to turn it over to John November.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you guys for being here and caring about this issue. Like Craig mentioned, our policymakers and our utilities, they're the tip of the spear, but we as Floridians and our visitors make up that entire spear. We are creating this waste resource, and it's so important that we continue to focus on this issue moving into the future. It's often very much forgotten concept, a forgotten resource. And I truly believe through dedicated advocacy over the past 7 years or so, and advocacy moving into the future, that we're going to be able to benefit from emerging technologies and science-based solutions to create real change. Um, so it's something where we have to continue to eliminate allowing ourselves to do the cheapest and dirtiest thing and put guardrails in place so that we as a society and we as a state continue to strive to do better because we have to. Unfortunately, the St. Johns River has suffered from nutrient pollution in recent years because of too many nutrients entering the system. We fought hard during rulemaking back in 2020 to ensure that it would limit the amount of biosolids, Class B biosolids, that would be applied based on a phosphorus-based rate and a nitrogen-based rate, and that dramatically has reduced the amount of nutrients entering the system. But there's no doubt that biosolids are directly tied to the eutrophication, the increase in nutrients in the St. Johns River. And that's a direct correlation to the hyperconcentration of those nutrients in our river over the past decade, like Lisa showed in her previous slide. So having the science to back us up was so important, but we soon came to realize that dollars and cents and discussion of economic ramifications and impacts is something that our legislators really respond to. Next slide. So, as you can see, $1.12 billion in projected cleanup cost liability to restore these impaired waterways in the St. Johns River caused by this hyper concentration of materials over the past decade. Um, so the problem is, even though we have been forced to take South Florida's Class B biosolids over the past 10 years, we are then stuck on the hook to offset our annual nutrient loading as we're trying to meet all these goals under our Basin Management Action Plan to reduce the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus, yet we're forced to continue taking another regions of the state's biosolids. And so we use this, can we, next slide? We use this economic study to inform legislatures who are considering um, the impacts of this practice and now have determined that, hey, Class B biosolids is really something that we want to try to get away from because it is the cheapest and dirtiest thing. And we know that it's kind of a sloshy material that when it rains, it immediately runs off or goes into the groundwater. And so it's important that we um, stop allowing the cheapest and dirtiest thing to keep on happening. And so by converting that material to Class AA product, which to gets the pathogens out and the vectors out of the product, allows it to become a cleaner product that's less risk to human health. And then on a more watershed basin level approach, it also reduces the amount of nutrients. And so we got the Balmoral group to do this incredibly detailed study, and we based it on 40 years because most of the funds that they use to fund how much this would cost to clean up is based on the useful life of a wastewater treatment facility that would take a similar amount of phosphorus out of a system. And so it was very defensible uh, uh, approach that was not alarmist, but really painted a picture of what this is going to cause for us, not just due to the land application of this over the past decade, but even sadder really is the legacy impacts. The phosphorus that's in our system will stay in our system until it's removed or treated in some way. And so it's going to be a long-term problem. Keep moving. And that was really just about the removing the phosphorus. It didn't talk about the health impacts the devaluation of our agricultural and riverfront properties, the loss of recreation, PFAS contamination, all these other things that come with the land application of biosolids. Now, it did make some estimates for what those would be, and it was in the millions of dollars for each of those concerns, but that was not included in the $1.12 billion. Keep going. So, biosolids are a PFAS source. PFAS is prevalent in our society altogether. It's not just biosolids, and we don't want to paint that picture. But if it's in our society, it's making its way into biosolids. It's important that we continue to treat this material to the highest level possible in order to reduce biosolids. And there are technologies out there, like a new plant that's going down in Indiantown when it runs and creates this liquid nitrogen fertilizer product. Their process actually takes the PFAS out of the biosolids as well. So if we keep on investing in heightened levels of technology, it will lead to better support. So this legislative session, it's pretty exciting in my opinion. We're raising the floor. Next slide. The omnibus bill, FDAC's farm bill. We don't love everything in the farm bill, but we like that it's banning the land application of Class B biosolids. Before, we wanted to ban the land application of Class B biosolids in impaired waterways. That would have been a reasonable middle ground, and that would have limited how many biosolids went into the St. Johns River Basin. But now, thankfully, they're eliminating Class B across the entire state. This would be come into effect by July 1, 2028. This will increase Class AA production, and Class AA is going to be the direction that a lot of facilities go to if they're not going to just dispose of the waste. And instead of calling it land application, it's actually masquerading as disposal. They'll actually take steps to either dispose of it in a landfill or take it out of the state, or they'll actually create a product that's meant to be a fertilizer or compost product that's actually effective. And so right now, Class AA is very lightly regulated. Once it's either given away or sold, it doesn't have any regulation on it. Next slide. And so it's so important. Lisa and I have been meeting with FDEP and other key stakeholders over the past year to try to identify how we could close this loophole and ensure that Class AA biosolids were not disposed of and masquerading as land application. And so, thankfully, with the leadership of Senator Bradley and Representative Schoaf, we've been able to pass incremental legislation. We're not ready to pass it yet, but it's passed 4 committees. It'll be appearing in 2 more committees next week that closes the Class AA loopholes. It makes clear that they can't apply more than the crops need, and that if you do it in a way that's considered disposal, that's prohibited, and FDEP can bring enforcement action. It also includes some record keeping. It doesn't include record keeping all the way from when it leaves the utility to when it gets to the field, but it includes very detailed record keeping for when it's coming for land application. And so over the next year, Lisa and I and Craig are going to be working with FDEP to close that gap so that we can identify when particular facilities are at risk of having environmental repercussions. And then at that point, hopefully we can continue to ensure that this law is enforced and is not just sitting on the bookshelf, but is actually reducing the likelihood of impacts from Class AA. Next slide. There's also other related biosolids management, which we're happy to see, that basically says that we want to limit land application if there's a permanent wastewater treatment facility that can accept the septage. To basically, let's not allow land application where we don't need it. Instead, let's put it back into a wastewater treatment seat and treat it to a higher level. Next slide. Also, there's some good legislation moving forward that'll allow us to it'll limit some of the PFAS created materials, this aqueous film forming foam that is so problematic for PFAS, and it also requires PFAS testing in biosolids. So we'll have a better idea of the risks involved with the biosolids treatment process currently. Lisa?
Thank you, John. And we did want to make it easy for you all to help us support this good legislation, Senate Bill 1294 and 1245. So if you have your cameras, you can easily take a photo of this QR code, and it gives you just directly to a spot where you can weigh in. This will also be on our website, and we'll share it out via social media. So we'll leave that up for a minute as I invite Dryden and both of our speakers back on. I know y'all, I see there's lots of activity in the chat. And so we'd love to answer any questions, and we'll let Dryden help us work through that. Dryden?
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you for putting that QR code up for us. We did have a lot of activity in the chat, so I will try and get to what we can. The first question in there was, did Riverkeeper sue to stop the dumping of biosolids?
No, we did not sue to stop the biosolids. We actually looked, and John, if you want to jump in, we looked at several avenues, but since it's considered a beneficial product, and the way it was permitted, there was not a legal avenue that we could find to move forward.
Yeah, that's correct. We threatened litigation, and we used the economic study to show that, although other communities were saying, "Woe is me, it's going to cost us more money," we were able to show that, hey, it's going to cost our community money too if you dump it on up into the St. Johns River Basin. So we had the threat of litigation, but in the end, we were able to help FDP get consent orders that created better environmental results, not perfect environmental results, but better. And sometimes better is perfect is the opposite of good. And sometimes you got to just take incremental benefits when you can get them.
Thank you. So I know we talked about it a little bit, but what really is the difference between Class AA biosolids and Class B? Like, getting into the nitty-gritty, how much of a difference is it making going from B, trying to eliminate more of those, and with the Class AA?
Craig?
I'll take it. Thanks. Yeah, so they're fundamentally three classes, but there's really almost no Class A produced. So we're really looking at Class B and AA, or at the federal level, it's referred to as AEQ. And you have to understand that biosolids were all about preventing people from being impacted by heavy metals. That was really the driver as far as human risk and exposure, with pathogens secondary. Nutrients were not part of the regulatory framework for defining biosolid treatment levels. So the differences are just a progressive improvement in terms of the pathogens that are still present, in terms of human health exposure, and heavy metals that can cause neurological issues or be toxic themselves. So as you move up from B to AA, those continue to decline to the point at AA where, at least in terms of federal standards, the presumption is that these are safe for human exposure, that you're not likely to get sick and you're not likely to be absorbing any heavy metals. As far as the nutrient end of things, there's not a huge difference. I know John can talk a little further on this. As you sort of step up the level of composting, depending on the technology that's being used, you may absorb some of those nutrients, you may sequester some of them, and therefore the higher quality composted products may have slightly lower levels of phosphorus or nitrogen, or they may be transformed from relatively quick release to slower release forms that presumably will be a little safer for disposal in the landscape.
Yeah, I guess I would just like to add that the Class AA products, a lot of those are compost products. And unfortunately, there's a wide variation in the quality of compost products. Products that are more mature and stable have a lot less nutrients available than biosolids compost products that are less stable and less mature. And it's a difference of putting the time in by the biosolids compost producers to ensure that they're making quality products. And part of our legislation for Senate Bill 1294 and House Bill 1245 does try to attend to close a loophole where you can't just create Class AA product and call it compost. You either have to actually register and label that product, so say what the nutrient ramifications of land application will be, or you have to be certified under the U.S. Composting Council's program that ensures that it's high quality compost. And so we are going to, the ball does continue to move forward with this legislation, but compost is certainly not perfect. Class AA, another really good thing about Class AA is that it can be used for its BTUs for waste to energy, where Class B cannot. So as things develop in the future, even right now, cities in Miami and South Florida are able to send their Class AA materials to places that concrete and fertile locations where they can burn it for energy. And so not every piece of Class AA has to go onto the land. Ideally, they would only do that if it's the least expensive option. But if you can take it and burn it and use it for energy, that's going to hopefully offset a lot of Class AA materials going onto the land into the future.
I'd only add one extra comment that remember, time and oxidation are money. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it comes back to our pocketbooks for the levels of treatment that we wish to endorse and would like society to move towards. But there is an expense with moving things to a higher level of usefulness.
Thank you. So the next question that I have is a little bit of multifaceted. It's a couple questions in one, but it all goes together. So how often are biosolids applied to the land? And if so, when, like what times of year? And then are there certain times of year or seasons that increase the magnitude of the effects of biosolid application?
Lisa, you want to jump on that? I responded to the question in terms of the data that we collected. All that was just simply at the annual level. That's how things are reported by the DEP. But the timing of it is a special issue in terms of watershed management.
So one note on Class B biosolids is the water table. If the water table is within 6 inches of the surface, you're not supposed to be able to land apply, which does limit, we hope, the amount of land application that's happening if it's enforced. Once the Class B becomes prohibited in 2028, it's going to shift to all Class AA, and you're only going to be able to apply at the agronomic rate. However, your nutrient management planner ideally will be limiting how much you need to apply based on the season, and the legislation makes clear that if the land cover or the crop that is being applied with the biosolids cannot reasonably take up those amount during that season, then that would be considered disposal, and FDEP could bring an enforcement action. So it is limited, but that limitation is only going to be as good as FDEP's enforcement of the law is.
Great. I think one or two more questions. So say we were to ban the practice of applying biosolids, where else would they be disposed of? I know we've talked about this a little bit, but if anybody wants to elaborate.
So they're gonna make it so you can't land apply Class B biosolids, but Class AA biosolids, that's typically like a dried pellet product. In some circumstances, it's still kind of sludgy or a lime stabilized or cake product, but I think a lot of communities are going to be moving away from that. But like I said before, they can either dispose of it in a landfill, take it out of the state into areas that are not as prone to algal blooms and other environmental vulnerabilities like we have in the state of Florida, or they can be burnt for waste to energy. And I think that is moving in a direction that's very hopeful for the future, that wastewater treatment facilities could actually be run on their own biosolids waste product. And so I think that gives a lot of room for optimism moving into the future.
I'll add, if DEP were correct in terms of their presentation to the Senate back in December, that landfilling is in fact going up, that is clearly still part of the state level management mix of where biosolids go. And that's problematic in terms of the biosolids basically being sequestered there, but they generate methane. If the methane's not trapped, we're contributing to greenhouse gases, and that's another social impact. Of course, landfill space is incredibly valuable. That was, in a sense, an advantage for moving towards land application in terms of landfill space being allocated to municipal solid waste that otherwise can't be, processed well or efficiently or cost effectively. So, moving towards waste to energy, as I said, there's a lot of capital costs associated with that. It really depends on the quality of the mix going in. I'll come back to that Cedron Varcor methodology that is under construction in Indiantown. The facility is designed to take 45,000 tons per year, which would absorb most of South Florida at, in the ballpark of 1/7 of the or eighth of the state's total biosolids production. Of course, there's no accounting for how well it will be run or, if it'll be, have a lot of downtime or not. But that's one particular avenue that obviously the state is endorsing in terms of its permitting. And that presents the opportunity to go ahead and extract phosphorus and potential electricity, ammonia, and clean water. And the only other aspect to be dealt with is the ash product or the residue from their particular proprietary process and where that ultimately gets disposed. And just to be clear, that still may have PFAS in it. Their particular technology does not eliminate PFAS. So, everything's a bit of a tar baby in terms of the, whatever is in the biosolids eventually needs to be managed wisely.
Great. I'll do one more quick question and then we'll end it so you all can get back to work, back to your life today. But somebody put, I heard that Brevard County bans sludge land application. Is this true? And can this be supported in a county by county effort?
Yeah, so Brevard County, they actually passed a moratorium on new sites, so it was not retroactive. Indian River County actually passed a moratorium on all sites, so they actually shut down some sites. Unfortunately, now there has been a moratorium or preemption of counties doing something similar based on the rule that was, or the law that was passed in 2020 that helped a little bit. And so it's really going to take a statewide proposal to do so. And really, that's what we want. We don't want to have one county or two counties take action and just being shifted over to the Swanee River or to another river. We really want, and I think that's one of the three organizations that are here today are working together because we need a long-term sustainable strategy for the state of Florida. Because we need to quit playing whack-a-mole with this really dangerous substance. So appreciate that question. Appreciate all of your questions. If we did not get to your question, we'll be able to answer those with you one-on-one. We'll also share everyone's emails that are on here so we can continue the dialogue. So if you have ideas or questions, we'd love to hear from you. John or Craig, do y'all have anything you want to wrap up with?
Just real quick, Haley, get in contact with me about that permitting issue. I want to talk about that more. And Andy, it's based on their the agronomic rate is going to be based on their nutrient management planners recommendations based on UFIFIS and general agronomic principles. So it's not going to be a permitted rate. We wanted there to be a permit based on whether the product was sold or not, but that was stripped out of the legislation, unfortunately. So this is going to be based on their own calculations for what agronomic rate will mean. Unfortunately, it's best we could do this year.
Lisa, nothing else from me. I thank you for the time and opportunity to share a Thousand Friends report with all the attendees, and we welcome any questions offline later.
Yeah, thank you so much to our speakers and thank you to everybody who participated today. There will be a recording of this conversation that will be posted on our website in the coming days. And I will also send it out to everyone who registered for this call. So you should have that and feel free to share it out to your network and definitely get in touch with us if you have any other questions.
Thank you all.
Thank y'all.